Hello everybody in Senseless Nation. King Kilius here with the next chapter of my book. And I got a few comments last video about confusion with whether or not it is a fantasy novel as I said it was. And just a little confusion there, and this chapter should clarify that for you guys. So, without further ado, haha, doo-doo. Poop jokes, always funny. Here we go. Born to Hail, Chapter 2. Sebastian found himself floating in a sea of black. He swam through the vast expanse of nothingness. He had no concept of time here. Seconds felt like hours, and hours felt like seconds. With nothing around for him to see, he could only feel that he was moving. So, this is the afterlife? Sebastian stated to himself flatly. Not sure if he actually spoke aloud or if it was just a thought. His lips moved, but the sound of his words never touched his ears. Is this limbo? Or is this the eternity of death? He wondered. I hope not the latter, he said sincerely. Sebastian was still in the throes of his despair. Ending his life was supposed to be his escape from the pain. It was not the case, though. He felt it all, as he did before he took his plunge. Maybe this is my hell, my punishment for taking my own life. Am I to float in this nothingness for all time? Stuck in this miserable place to be eaten away by my own thoughts? Here alone, till the end of time? With each question brought another. With each question he had no answer and he grew angry. This was supposed to be his way out. This was to end his despair, his heart-wrenching sadness, and the pain he felt deep within himself. All these thoughts and more raced through his mind, left with nothing to do but to dwell on all of it. Sebastian felt his body beginning to increase in speed. How fast he was moving he could only guess at. There was no moving air in this place, but he was still able to breathe. Still, he increased in speed, in this place of pitch black. Seb imagined this place to be a part of the universe unmarked by stars or galaxies, or any other object you might find in the dead of space. He simply sped along feeling like an arrow shot in the dark. It was weird though, for this place contained no light or sound, yet he was able to see his own body, as though he was standing outside on a moonlit night. Ever increasing in speed, the feeling of his movement began to make his stomach churn. Clamping his eyes shut to battle against the wave of nausea, then all of a sudden the feeling of movement stopped, and behind his eyelids, he thought he could see light. There was an explosion to his senses. Seb could hear the howl of wind that he now felt on his face. Nostrils flared as he drew in a long breath. The air filled with the clean scent of spring after a shower. Opening his eyes, he found himself laying on a cold, damp, hard stone. Coming up to a sitting position, Sebastian was dizzied by what he saw. He stood at the edge of a cliff face of a lone mountain. Inching as close as he dared to the edge, he looked down. He guessed he was at least 1,000 feet high. Looking up, he could see the mountain rose into the clouds, unable to determine how tall this lonely mountain loomed. A panoramic view of the landscape spread out before him was a sight to behold. Spread out before him was a lush grassland, with rolling hills and sporadic patches of trees. He could see a great river in the distance, wider than any he'd ever seen before. Far into the horizon he could see the blue-gray outline of a distant mountain range. Mesmerized by the sights before him, all thoughts of his past life were momentarily gone. In that span of time, Sebastian felt no pain, no sorrow, no despair, no anger. All he felt was a tranquility that he hadn't known for quite some time. A question popped in his head and nagged at him, pulling him back to himself. Where am I? He repeated this in his mind over and over again. Where am I? Where am I? He had no answer though. This landscape was unfamiliar and foreign to him. I don't think I'm in Kansas anymore, he said out loud, joking to himself, and bringing a slight smile to his face. The first one he's had ever since Eve left him. If only he knew how many more were to come. How am I to get down from here? Better yet, how did I get up here? He asked out loud. Looking around the ledge he was on, he spotted a narrow path winding its way down from his perch. Not having any other choice, he began his descent into this unknown world he woke up in. Seb, unaccustomed to moving about mountain paths, was slow going down the treacherous path. Barely wide enough to accommodate him, gusts of wind threatening to blow him off, and many steep declines where he had to climb down instead of walking. At a couple places he had to shuffle sideways, his back against the mountain and the tips of his boots hanging over the edge. He gripped tightly to any handhold he could find. As dusk began to set, he came to a landing which had the mouth of a cave. A cold chill came with the setting sun. The chill in the air and the hours spent climbing down the mountain pass left his hands cramped. Walking over to the edge, he looked down to see how much further he needed to go. He guessed he only made it about halfway down from where he was. Looking to the mouth of the cave, Sebastian figured it would be the best place to camp for the night. He didn't have a plan as to where he was going. He actually had no clue, being in a strange land, more strangely the manner in which he arrived. Camping out for the night could give him a chance to ponder on the topic. Moving into the mouth of the cave, he felt a slight temperature change. It seemed to be warmer in the cave than it was outside. The deeper he went, the warmer it got. Not uncomfortably warm, just slight increases. Weird, it shouldn't be getting warmer the deeper I go, he thought to himself. After a short walk, the cave's entrance opened up into a cavern. Too dark to see, he couldn't make out how big the space was. Deciding this as good a place as any, Sebastian moved to the nearest wall and lay down. Many thoughts were running through his head. Where he was seemed to be one he focused on the most. He had no answer. Going through the events leading him here, he had no clue. One thing he was sure of was that he wasn't dead. The growl in his stomach confirmed that suspicion. Too confused to worry about eating at the moment, he pushed the hunger away. Other thoughts such as how he got here, where he was going, can he get back, did he even want to get back, all blurred through his mind. Okay, one thing at a time. Tomorrow I get down from here. By that time, I'll be starving. I guess I can try to find some wild fruit or berries. What about people? There has to be someone around here. Somewhere. It went on like that for a time. Eventually, the cave grew pitch black. Having decided to try and figure things out as he went, Sebastian finally fell into a light sleep. He was flying, soaring through the sky as a huge winged beast, flying over a land that he didn't recognize but oddly seemed to know exactly where he was going. The beautiful azure sky rolled out before him, only a few little wisps of clouds marring it. The landscape below him teeming with life, herds of deers prancing in the meadows, squirrels running through the trees chattering with one another, rabbits chasing new mates around, and the list went on. Not only could he see it all, but he could hear and smell it all as well. Like the river off to the north, he smelled the clean water in the air, heard it crashing over rocks that dare cross its path. Soaring off to the north towards the river to get a refreshing drink, he spotted a lone figure moving across the countryside at a steady pace. Curiosity couldn't win out against basic instincts such as both a meal and a refreshing drink. Noting the strange bipedal figure for investigation after his morning meal. Banking into a sharp descent, he rolled his way down towards the river. Along the bank was a magnificent buck, larger than any he'd ever seen. The sheer size of the stag could only attest to its prowess in the area, having dodged many a predator over the years to obtain such a size. Not today, though. Today he had no way to escape his fate. Almost reluctantly, he landed, claws open, upon the animal. With large sharp teeth, he devoured the deer in moments. Striding over to the river to clean the gore off his snout, he looked at his reflection in the clear, calm running water. In the reflection, he saw a large head with crimson-colored scales. 2 large black horns protruding from the top of the head, and 2 more smaller ones coming out each side. Before him was the head of a dragon. He was seeing his reflection. The head belonged to him. What a dream, Sebastian said to himself, wiping the sleep from his eyes. Never before has he had such a vivid dream, and of a dragon nonetheless. Sebastian was suddenly startled by a growl. Looking around, he saw nothing in the dark of the cavern. Listening, he heard no movement. Realization came to him that it was his stomach. Laughing aloud to himself, that's what I get for sleeping on an empty stomach. Dreaming I'm a dragon eating a whole deer. Hours later, Sebastian finally made it to soft soil and grass. Panting heavily and sweating profusely, he dropped down to the ground, scanning the area for the best place to find food. Seeing trees off in the distance, he set off in that direction in hopes of finding some nuts, berries, and fruit if he was lucky. Try as he might, he couldn't remember ever being in this place. This wasn't a landscape that he was familiar with. Where am I? Maybe I'm in a coma. That fall should have killed me. If I was in a coma, I doubt I would come to that conclusion, though. Wouldn't I think this all to be right? No, I don't think I'm in a coma. Also, don't think I'm dead. So what happened? Sebastian continued to ask those questions as he walked. With each step, his stomach seemed to growl louder at him to get some food. His hunger took over his thoughts. Finding food was the only thing on his mind as he walked into the small forest. He could hear the normal sounds of woodland life. Small animals scurrying through the ground litter, birds singing and fluttering through the trees. As he wandered through the outer edge of the forest, not wanting to go too deep and get lost, he began gathering acorns, walnuts, and other nuts he believed to be edible. He used the rock he had picked up to crack open the shells and ate as he gathered, all the while wishing he had a knife or some other kind of weapon he could use to catch an animal to eat. Having gathered as much as he could carry, Seb sat down against the trunk of a large maple tree to eat his fill, or as close to full as he was likely to get. As he ate, he listened to the sounds of nature around him. The air smelled fresh here, fresher than he could ever remember air smelling. The lush greens of the forest vibrant and shining with life. A cool breeze lazily rustling tree branches rained morning dew down on him. Sebastian always seemed to be at home in the great outdoors. Tranquil and serene, he would let it wash through him in times of stress. As memories of hunting trips with his father washed through him, he drifted off into a light slumber. The light breeze carried with it the sweet smell of cooking meat. Faint though it was, the aroma was strong enough to entice Sebastian's empty stomach. His stomach's roars of protest brought him out of his slumber. With promises of real food on the wind, Sebastian started walking, guided by his nose as if he was some sort of dog. It wasn't long before he saw the glow of a campfire, like a beacon in the dimly lit forest. Seb entered the glow of the camp. The smell of the roasting rabbit he saw strung up on a spit above the flames overwhelmed him. With his stomach now in a frenzy, he gave no thought to why the camp was empty. He took 2 steps towards the fire, mouth salivating, then was stopped by cold steel on his shoulder and a keen edge pressed against his neck. "What are you about?" the man behind him said in a deep but smooth voice. Is all Sebastian was able to voice. At that moment his mind was in a confused frenzy. Still staring almost hypnotically at the food, he was unable to think about who had asked that question and the sting on his neck from the blade. "What are you about?" came the question again, more forcefully this time. The man pressed harder against Sebastian's neck to press an answer. Sebastian took a deep breath to clear his mind and closed his eyes, blocking out the sight of the food. "I smelled what you have cooking here. I'm starving. Sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you." Sebastian was finally able to spit out. Calming himself more, he added, "I can leave if..." He was able to finish as the man grabbed him by the other shoulder with a huge hand and turned him around. Sebastian nearly swooned at the sight before him. There stood the biggest man he had ever seen, standing near 8 feet tall with a wicked double-bladed axe clutched in his hand. This man, this giant, was a sight to behold. Arms bulging with rugged muscles, legs thicker than most of the younger trees around them. His hide vest so tight against his torso, it seemed to Sebastian as if it would burst into shreds at the slightest provocation. His neck, bigger around than Sebastian's thigh. He sported a closely shaved blonde beard and short cropped hair of golden blonde. With a scowl, he locked onto Sebastian with his piercing blue eyes. Are you a god?" Sebastian asked, not knowing what else to say at that moment. There was a long pause as the two of them stared into each other's eyes. Seb's showing his apparent fear, while the others showed nothing. Then came a boom of laughter that rumbled up through the giant man's chest and spilled forth from his mouth. "Ha ha 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 ha! I am no god," came the reply, as the man lowered his axe, figuring this puny man before him posed no threat. "Name's Lucan, son of Ludwig, of the Orksbane tribe. I am barbarian. What you go by, little man?" "Sebastian Hale," he answered, extending his hand slowly. Lucan eyed him curiously for a moment before grasping Sebastian's hand and giving it a vigorous shake. "Good to meet you, friend," Sebastian voiced, hoping the friend part to be true. He didn't want to think about what this barbarian could do to him if he thought differently. Lucan said nothing and walked past him to the fire. Sitting on the forced litter, he removed the rabbit from the fire and produced another to be cooked. Seb, taking the silence as acceptance, moved in beside Lucan. Sitting though he was didn't diminish the opposing size of the man. Still silent, Lucan handed Sebastian the cooked rabbit. "Thanks," is all he said before tearing into the creature. Over the next hour, as they ate their fill, Lucan watched Sebastian, thinking the little man a curious sight. Though he had only seen few people who were not barbarian, this Sebastian seemed different. The first thing he noticed being off was the man's manner of dress. He wore a heavy black long-sleeve shirt with a hood that covered his arms loosely. His pants had randomly shaped patterns of earthen colors. The way his attire hung loosely from his limbs led Lucan to think they belonged to a bigger man. His gaze came to rest on Sebastian's face. He looked from his unkempt, shaggy brown hair and curious red beard, finally to rest on his dark blue eyes that still reflected a deep emotional wound. Another thing that seemed out of place was the lack of a blade of some sort. Where you come from, Sebastian, to not know of barbarians? Surely all your kind have heard and fear our prowess in battle, he asked, thinking it time to get some answers from this strange man. I have heard of barbarians, but only in books. Fictional stories mostly. I am pretty sure I am not from around here. Or better put, from this world. Sebastian answered honestly, given the events of the past 2 days, having come to the conclusion that he was no longer on his world. He could not think of any other explanation, far-fetched though it was. I understand not of what you speak, and I care not for riddles, so speak clearly, Lucan stated to him with a slight hint of irritation in his voice. Barbarians are a fighting breed and are straightforward in their speech, caring not at all for dancing around words. Many would rather fight than to trade words with another, especially when speaking to those who were not barbarians. Sebastian shrank back a little, fearing this giant, in his eyes, might strike him down. Sebastian shrank back a little, fearing this giant, in his eyes, might strike him dead with little or no effort. Sorry, I didn't mean to offend. I fell from a cliff. He began, too embarrassed to admit, even to himself, that he had jumped trying to kill himself. Instead of hitting the ground, I found myself floating, or flying, I'm not sure which, through this place that was pitch dark. When I left that place, I found myself high up on the cliff on that mountain over there. He pointed in the direction he thought he had entered the forest from. It took me all of yesterday and most of this morning to climb down from it. I came to these woods in search of some sort of food. Thank you again for sharing yours with me, by the way. I was wandering these woods eating nuts I found on the ground. Then I caught wind of your campfire, so I followed the smell of food here. Why not just hunt for food as I did? Lucan asked, not sure if he believed the story. He knew of the magic in this land, but didn't think a human such as this man possessed such powers. Given the man's strange dress, he had trouble doubting his tale. I would have, but I don't have anything to hunt with, he simply stated as he reached into his pocket, pulling out his cigarettes and lighter along with the insides of his pocket, to show that he was telling the truth. This is all that I had on me from my world. Having seen his cigarettes reminded him he hadn't smoked one since he got here. With that thought in mind, he pulled one out and lit it. Seeing how Sebastian apparently produced fire from his hands, Lucan asked, You have magic, why not just use that? Puzzled from the question, Sebastian sat there for a second, wondering what he meant by having magic. Oh, you mean this? He said, holding out his hand to show his lighter to Lucan. It's called a lighter. It's not magic, I assure you. They make these things where I come from. Here, I'll show you how it works. Using his thumb, he pressed down on the top of it and lit it, holding it towards Lucan to show him how it works. There is a gas inside that is flammable, and this metal piece here, he pointed to the little metal wheel, rolls across a flint, making a spark which ignites the gas, like so. One more time, he demonstrated lighting the lighter. Looks like magic to me, Lucan said, fixing a curious stare on the lighter inside Sebastian's hand. Sebastian put the lighter away, dropping the issue, not wanting to anger this man. Once again, they sat in silence, the forest growing dark around them. Staring at the fire for the most part, Sebastian would occasionally look over at the man sitting a few feet away from him. Unable to take the uncomfortable silence anymore, Sebastian risked a question. Where is the rest of your Orcsbane tribe? He winced a split second later as he saw the visage on the large man's face darken considerably. Seb, fearing he had asked the wrong question as he saw obvious pain in Lucan's eyes. Dead, Lucan replied bluntly. I am the last of my tribe. I am so sorry, I didn't... He would have continued with his apology, but was cut off. I don't need your damn pity, puny man, roared the barbarian. "Nor will I have an apology from a stranger not of this world, so ye put it." The barbarian's anger cooled some when he saw Sebastian shrink back in fear. Although he felt bad for yelling at Sebastian, who was scared and confused, the proud warrior didn't attempt an apology. Seb just stared at him, thinking the question dropped, and having no inclination of pursuing the topic further. "My people are, or were, a proud nomadic people who roamed the land many leagues to the south of here. My father, Ludwig, was our chieftain, and I was their finest warrior." His chest puffed out as he spoke those last words. "I had ventured out on my own to hunt. Many days from our tents did I go, for I was enjoying the time alone." There was a slight catching in his voice. Sebastian wasn't sure if he truly heard it, or if it was just his imagination. He figured he had heard true when Lucan suddenly turned his head to look off into the woods, or was he looking into himself to find strength to continue? Sebastian doubted this man to lack strength of any kind, though. "Upon my return," the man continued at length, "upon my return, I found my tribe slaughtered. I could not find any bodies that were not of my ilk among the dead. I'm thinking some cowards came in the night to rob my people of their lives. How else could there be no dead enemies among my people?" "If you're from the south of here, why are you here now?" Sebastian asked before he thought better of it. "I come in seek of answers of who killed my people," Lucan simply stated. "Answers from who?" Sebastian risked another question. He felt certain now that Lucan was saddened by the loss of his tribe, and rightfully so. Seb also had a suspicion that the man's grief ran deeper than that. "Zieg Fornell, who lives in that lonely mountain. The Dragon Tooth, the mountain is called." "What makes you think this Zieg Fornell will have the answers to your questions?" "He is a dragon, one of the mightiest and wisest of all, so the legends." "A dragon?" Sebastian thought back to his dreams and nearly swooned again. First this enormous man, and now dragons? What else could this place possibly have? Seb had a feeling there was so much more, and also he would find out. "And you plan to go up and ask this dragon who killed your people?" Sebastian asked, unable to hide the sarcasm in his voice. If Lucan heard the sarcasm, he didn't show any outward signs. "Ask! I am a barbarian warrior, the finest and last of my tribe. I will not ask, I will demand. And if this mighty dragon doesn't give me my answers, I shall beat it out of him." The barbarian, chest puffed out again, boasted as much to himself as he did to Sebastian. Through the whole conversation, Sebastian, too intrigued with the tale, didn't notice Lucan had produced his hunting knife and had been whittling 2 sticks. "I wish to spar. Do you know how to fight?" Lucan asked as he stood and tossed a stick to Sebastian. Though caught by surprise, he was able to catch the stick, which had been made to resemble a crude sword. "I do not. Even if I did, I think I would be no match for you," Sebastian answered. "I didn't think so. I noticed you carry no weapon, a careless thing to do if you plan to survive out here." He swept his hand in a wide arc, gesturing all around. "Spar with me still, ye might learn something." Taking him for his word, Sebastian decided to go along with this man, who was from this place. The fact that Sebastian was still terrified of the large man played a hand in his decision as well. He stood up and took up a stance that he had seen in the movie. He tried not to think about the fact that he barely came up to the chest of Lucan. Steeling his nerve, Sebastian nodded he was ready. Sebastian came in with a half-hearted overhead swing, which was easily deflected by the barbarian, who in return brought his weapon around to strike Sebastian in the side of the knee. Sebastian winced through the pain and hopped back a step, and took up his stance once again. Again, Sebastian came in to strike first. This time, he put a little bit more feeling behind his strike. Again, it was easily parried, and Lucan scored another hit. Luckily for Sebastian, the giant man was going easy on him, for even a dry, thin tree branch was a dangerous weapon in the barbarian's massive hands. It went on like that for a few hours, Lucan noticing the apparent lack of skill Sebastian had in combat. Lucan, who had barely broken a sweat, watched Sebastian, who was drenched, become more and more frustrated by the fact that he could not score even the slightest of hits. He also scrutinized the poor man's off-balance stance, his poor posture, and lack of proper foot movements. Sebastian, using the sleeve of his shirt, wiped sweat from his face. He was breathing hard, this being more of a workout than climbing down the mountain path. He knew in the back of his mind he was nowhere close to being a match for this man. Still, that didn't diminish the growing ire in him. One hit. Just one hit, he kept saying to himself. If he could score just one hit, he would accomplish something. He didn't really know what that accomplishment would be. Wasn't able to think on it too hard. Still, with those thoughts, his anger grew. In one final burst of desperation and frustration, he charged in. A bestial growl escaped between his lips as he charged. Urgh. His makeshift sword high above his head as he ran in. Lucan was moving his arm in reaction to the expected move, which had been repeated numerous times in the past few hours. Sebastian saw the shift in the man's shoulders and halted his charge prematurely. Base instincts kicked in for Sebastian at that moment, for he didn't truly halt his charge but planted his right foot firmly and pivoted on it. As he spun, he brought his stick down and out to the side, gaining momentum. Though the barbarian was surprised by the feint and silently congratulated Sebastian on the move, he was still able to block the blow. Lucan stopped the rushing stick with his left hand and held firmly as he brought his own down between the two men's grasp on it. In an explosion of dust and splitters, it split in half. Damn! I thought I had you that time, Sebastian said between deep gasps of air. His anger seemed to fly away with the remains of his makeshift sword. Ha! A puny man like you? Lucan laughed. We'll have to try better tricks than that to score a hit on me. Ha! Again, Lucan laughed, but it wasn't a mocking or taunting laugh. It was one of admiration for the man. Although this little man was new to combat, he was still able to come close to scoring a hit on the proud warrior. Lucan wouldn't admit that to Sebastian, though. Maybe next time, Sebastian challenged, laughing a little himself. He couldn't help but laugh, actually, looking up at the nearly 8-foot tall man, chest puffed out with a wide grin on his face. He wasn't sure what it was about the barbarian, but Sebastian decided he liked the man. Maybe, Lucan agreed, still grinning. And maybe I can make a fighter out of you, so I don't have to fight all your battles for you, he added lightheartedly. They both made their way back to the campfire, Lucan putting more kindling on it and poked at the embers to bring it back to life after their sparring match. They spent some time discussing the match, Lucan giving Sebastian some tips he might try next time. Sebastian, exhausted from the day, lay down back to the fire and slipped quietly into a deep sleep on the forest floor. Lucan sat watching the fire, pondering about his newfound friend, and building confidence for the meeting he would have with the dragon the next day. He sat there for an hour or so, deep in thought, before he too slipped off into a deep slumber. Alrighty, Senseless Nation. What did you think about that chapter? That one was a little bit longer, and for those of you that was expecting fantasy, there you go. It's back in the mix. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the chapter. And come back to hear more of it. You said, this is my book. I wrote it. And, you know, I want you guys to like it. Like, you know, I like it. I've read it and read through it numerous times. And to be honest with you, sometimes, like, I find myself surprised that I actually wrote some of the stuff. And if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, drop them in the comments section below. This is Senseless Gaming. Like, subscribe, hit that bell icon, stay notified.